sure. So this tonight is going to be a 15 slide presentation deck. So probably the shortest presentation deck you're going to have to sit through for a while, talking about some of the foundational principles that go into my processing, my views of processing, how I review some of the key elements of processing to keep in mind what I'm looking at in developing my images. And then we have around 15 images that have been submitted by members of the club. Well, a little less than that because we have some raw files. And what I'm going to do then is demonstrate some of the processing techniques I use, primarily focused in Lightroom and using local adjustment brushes and local so using the grad filter, the radial filter, and the brush to shift emphasis and focus on details and textures. I'm a big proponent of local adjustments over global adjustments. And then looking briefly at the images, I see some stuff where I'm going to be able to show one of the techniques I use to set white balance. I'm going to be able to show one of the techniques, which is a little different on how to open up shadows without completely altering the image. And so I'm looking forward to that. This is, interestingly enough, in all of the Camera Club presentations I've been giving, and I've been giving them quite regularly with the restrictions, only my second one back to Colorado. So it's nice to come home, and I won't talk about the Broncos or anything else, or ask about how ski season is, because we're in a drought here right now again. So we're going to do a live image review. And I think kind of the first philosophy with a lot of processing, and obviously comes up or continually comes up in questions from people in these presentations, especially to non-camera clubs, is just the degree and the level of the complexity that goes into it, and what kind of shortcuts people can ask. It's a constant question. Well, how do you make that go faster? Is there a plug-in or an add-in or an app? And I'm not a big proponent of apps. I'm not a big proponent of a lot of other things that go into these. And I kind of like this because I shall become a master in this art only after a great deal of practice. And I think if I could amend this quote, it would be, and multiple times of failure. I look at a lot of my images in my portfolio that I've had to go back and process again and again and again. And I still have some of my images that I'm still not happy with how they look. And hopefully by the time we get to 2022, I will have found some new techniques to get them the way I want. So it is a process, an ongoing process for all of us that have labored through luminosity masks or suffered through understanding some of the basics in Lightroom. So the next question I get oftentimes is, when should I post-process? When should I be post-processing my images? And I have a pretty simple answer. It's every single time. And for people that say, yes, but, I say, yes, see answer number one. And then, but what about, and then I say, yeah, reference number one and look again at number two. There should never be an image, in my opinion, this is my opinion, as a Colorado native, live in California, I got to have some opinions, throw some things in there, where you shouldn't be post-processing an image. Even an iPhone image, even in doing the simple things on your phone, you can do a couple minor tweaks and modifications, something around the highlights typically, maybe put a tiny vignette on it and completely change the texture. And so for me, in my experience, even the most simple JPEG, the most compressed image I have, if I'm going to share that with anybody, text messaging or whatever else, I'm going to simply, honestly, I'm going to do a minor bit of processing before I send those out. And definitely in terms of our work that we do otherwise. So that's my rule of processing, keeping those really simple. What is processing though? There's kind of 5 elements I break down within that. The performing a series of mechanical operations on something in order to change or preserve it. And so that is some of the essence of processing, is some elements of mechanical operations in terms of our sliders, in terms of what we're doing there, that are designed to change or preserve something. By changing it, it is changing the elements we deal with, the luminosities, the contrast, the textures, maybe the area of focus, or oftentimes it's to preserve it. And when I talk about preserving something, that's talking about preserving the emotion, what I felt out in the field, the feelings that I had, what I might have been feeling in terms of mood, and kind of putting those forward. The second one is post-process is the process of editing the data captured by a camera to enhance the images. And so that is the other part of post-processing I think people oftentimes will look over or think about incorrectly. This is just raw data captured onto a memory card through a camera sensor, through millions of pixels. A 36 megapixel camera is 36 million pixels of light that the sensor is now grabbed. And so it's about, for us as photographers and creatives, how do we want to work with all of that data that's been imported into our information? The next part of this is what is processing, and it's correcting color, brightness, contrast, and other basic exposure settings. For me, post-processing is not adding tremendous amounts of things. It's more about taking away. We'll be taking away certain parts and pieces and some of the techniques. But post-processing, unless you're in the fine art or digital art world, should not be about deception, about deceiving our viewers or completely changing the scene. If you're doing it for fine art, be upfront about that. Digital manipulation is a total craft that a lot of people do. But you'll see, and when I was on social media, I got off a couple of years ago, it would really bother me when you would see images where you had a Milky Way in a part of the sky that wasn't present or within that context. They had a north-facing land, they're facing north on a landscape image, and they had the Milky Way. And when people would ask them, well, is this a composite? They would insist no. And so that level of post-processing is not something that I fully believe in. The other part of what is processing is fixing issues like crooked horizons, distortions, dust spots and blemishes. Dust spots and blemishes. I didn't know I was going to have a hard time with that word tonight. So what post-processing is, it's not a free license to deceive your viewers. If you alter an image, call it out. There's nothing wrong with digital art or digital manipulation. Just be sure to call it out. Yeah, this is a composite image, or this is one I took here, or whatever else. People aren't going to typically turn their nose up or judge you. And if they do, they probably shouldn't care. But if you're trying to pass it off, it's a different story. What post-processing also is in the place where you can fix anything and everything you should have gotten right in the field. I teach a class on fixing some of your issues in post-processing, which is a very popular class and one that I enjoy, because it's all about, sometimes we don't get it right, get certain aspects right in the field, and there are minor ways we can correct those in post-processing. But oftentimes I'll see clients with images where the light is just completely wrong, and they're like, well, how can we fix this image? And it's like, we can fix it by going back out again, which is a great license. The other part of it is something you should not be ashamed of doing. Like I mentioned, I think last week I gave a presentation to almost 400 people on the psychology of photography. I got another free one coming up in February, which I'll give you details about. And I had a lot of questions in the Q&A about manipulation, it was called, or whatever else. And I was not shy at all about every single image I process. Every single image I touch goes into Photoshop for the tiniest and minorest things, but I don't digitally manipulate my images. And then the other part is what post-processing is, a place where you can rely on your camera to get it right. I talk about technique, vision, and processing, and that is aligning our technique with the vision within the field that goes into our processing. And so if we're photographing in JPEG and just saying, well, the camera will figure this out, that's not post-processing. Post-processing is us understanding how our camera is capturing the scene, and then us being able to bring to life what we saw in the field within the constructs of what the camera's there. So when we talk about the job of us as artists or creatives, it's to deepen that mystery that exists. This is one of the images I took. This was in my top 12 images of 2020 that I'm putting out tomorrow to my newsletter subscribers. This was an image where I had a lot of mystery in this place. This is a single image exposure, one shot in this area called Shell Creek, just about 40 minutes from my house. And my vision was a little bit of Van Gogh Starry Night mixed with Van Gogh irises from the standpoint of the blue of the lupin and then the tree and then that Milky Way kind of going through there. But there's a lot of mystery that goes into an image like this that we as artists have that capability to bring out, and that's exciting. So some of the fundamentals of post-processing, first and foremost, is always shoot your images in RAW. I get people that are new in photography all the time, and I tell them, look, it might be a little while till you're ready to deal with the complexity of RAW images, but set your camera settings so you're capturing both JPEGs and RAWs. Because that way, if you want to go back later and edit an image that you took maybe early in your photography journey, you have that flexibility. And I've had a couple of clients 2 or 3 years out email me and say, hey, when you told me to capture in RAW and I told you I wasn't ready? Well, I was ready now, and I was able to go back to an image I took, 26 months ago and reprocess it. And here's the image, which is great. The other part of the fundamentals of post is calibration. And I talk about this from two perspectives. One is the calibration of your monitor. This is a very vital thing if you're going to be doing any printing or showing. The best monitors you can buy even come out of the box uncalibrated. I'm surprised when I calibrated my Mac for the first time. I was like, wow, I can't believe these colors were so minor off. But the other part of it is calibrating your expectations. So I'm a subscriber to a landscape photographer / photo expedition extraordinaire named Mark Adamus. He and I have been trying to coordinate doing some stuff for a while. His work is absolutely incredible. But he spends 300 days a year, or was spending up to 300 days a year in the field to capture this. His processing techniques have taken him decades to get to that point. And so when I look at my work and I compare it to Mark's, there isn't a comparison. His work is far more superior to what I'm able to do based on his skills and the time that he's able to invest. So that's good. Knowing the limitation of the programs and yourself. I talk a lot about how I have images in my portfolio that I don't know how to process yet. I took some images last year around this kind of unique sunset time up in the White Mountains where we have bristlecone pines here in California. Some really, really unique textures and things I was able to see in the field, which I haven't been able to get out in post-processing yet. So those images are going to sit on my hard drive for a while, and I believe I'll learn a technique somewhere down the line that I can bring it to life. But that's also part of knowing the limitations of myself. I'm not willing right now to spend the time and the effort to find that. I'd rather continue to build and work in other areas. The fourth principle is that's to have an idea where you think you might end up even before you start. We're all guilty of getting in there and moving sliders around and like, okay, I'm going to see what happens. Maybe some magic will happen. But if we don't have at least some idea of what we're wanting to bring out within the image and where we might end up, it's going to be a long journey to get there. And then follow. Follow is following a workflow. This is a crucial component in both my Lightroom and my Photoshop workflows. And my workshop classes, I give you copies of my workflows that I give them to you as Word documents that you can add or delete things that don't work. But once you start to follow a process and a workflow, you can really methodically process your images much faster. I can do probably 18 steps applying 12 or so different luminosity masks in my Photoshop workflow by building them myself in less than 10 minutes because I know my workflow so well, I can just do it methodically. And then if I start to see breakdowns in it or whatever else. And so that's part. And then the last one is being patient. Every single day for me, I have to be patient. Processing, remember this, processing is not an event. It is a process. And people think, oh, I hate processing. I dread processing. I hate it versus like enjoying that process, putting themselves back in that environment, taking the time to not be connected and multitasking and doing other things. So that's a good part. Okay, so how do I go about creating more depth and life within my images? Dodging and burning is one of the tools I use, and I'll show you some of tonight. Localized adjustments versus global adjustments is another big thing. I'll show you quite a few of those, as well as spending more time on white balance than almost any other thing. I'll show you a couple techniques that I use on white balance. And I look back on a lot of my early images in my portfolio, and I can tell you straight across the images that look absolutely crazy. My white balance was way out of whack before I started. Luminosity masks are a big thing. I'm teaching some classes coming up on luminosity masking, and it's a tremendously powerful thing, and it takes a little while to get it to click. But then when you do, you start to really understand how you can very, very small and very, very small increments impact a lot of your images. The next portion is selectively painting, which kind of ties in with luminosity masks. Kind of like dodging and burning, but really bringing in certain things in very, very subtle ways. And then light painting. is another portion. So pulling glow into images and what they go into. The 5 elements of processing. And so we'll talk about this. And I'm going to, I remember, so I have different charts, a couple more, 2 more charts coming up. So I'm going to put my email in the chat. And it's Nick at Stover Photo, NIC, no K. My mother didn't figure there was a K in Nicholas, so I put it in Nick. And I'm happy to send you this chart or any of the other charts I'll reference. I got a couple more coming up.
Nick, your email is posted in the notice for the meeting.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Well, that's good to hear too. So then when I start getting lots of spam email, I'll know where it came from. But I'm kidding. It's a joke. Somebody that sends out more emails than you guys do.
I hope not.
I could deal with it. So there's 5 elements of processing that I focus on. I actually have a sticky note on my computer. I only have a couple sticky notes. I only have 2 or 3. I'm up to 3 now. And this is one of them. And what we're looking to do, or should be looking to do, as we process our images, and these are the 5 aspects I've kind of identified and worked through, are depth, focus, sharpness, texture, and luminosity. And so depth is, when we think about it, is how can we bring out dimensionality within our images, and where can we focus on transitions, near to far, light to dark, warm to cool. How those elements all add a lot of depth to our image, which really, brings out eye movement. Focus is another one. So how do we want the person to focus within our image, and where do we want them to look? Sharpness is a similar thing. Should go from near to far. The tendency in Lightroom, in my opinion, is if you don't sharpen correctly, you can have your entire image sharp all the way through, when what you should be seeing is what is closest to you. It should be the sharpest, and that which is further away, which is the same way that our eye sees, would be much less in focus. Textures, and another big part. And I characterize this as, what do people want to touch? When they look at an image, what do you yourself want to touch? You find yourself doing this, or like grabbing something. So whether it's a sandstone and rubbing your hand over it, or the texture of a sea foam, or when I'm in the desert, just that texture of the sand and the ripples. And how can we bring that out? Do we do localized textures, et cetera? And then the final element is luminosity, or brightness. And the eye will always go to the brightest part within an image. And so that is something we can't fight. And people will try to fight that. Oh, this is the bright part, but I don't want people to look over there. I want to look over here. It's never going to happen. I talk about in my light and color, how we see light. And it's just, we're wired to see the longest wavelength lights, which are the brightest lights, first. It's the way our cones are set up. It's how we see things. So these are the 5 elements of processing. The next one, which I'll briefly chat on, is common mistakes. And this one's probably an eye chart that's too small to see, but happy to send it, that I see, that I've also talked about in learning from our mistakes. So trying to force the light, we don't get the light we want, and all of a sudden we'll be really focusing on forcing the light out that we want. Thinking we can fix it in post-processing. I've photographed with enough photographers over the years to be able to say, oh, I'll just fix it in post. I'll just fix it in post. And that's not my tendency, unless I just absolutely have one branch sticking into a beautiful image, and I'll say, well, I'll have to clone that out later. I'm not going to go breaking branches or something. The next part is setting the wrong white balance, which becomes the technique I'll show, and incomplete field techniques. I talk about technique, vision, and processing. And incomplete field techniques is where our technique isn't matching what we want to see. And so we want a really strong depth of field, and we have an image that flowers that are really close to us, yet we won't put the time in to focus stack the image. And then we don't have what we want. And then brain lock. We've all experienced this as well in our processing. And that is where we get into an image and we can't remember why we took that image. There was something that was compelling for us, but we can't seem to remember exactly what it was. And then the final one of common mistakes is being too heavy-handed. And I can still be guilty of this oftentimes, of over-processing my images. And then as I advance as a creative and a photographer, I can tell you I spend much less time. I'm much less heavy-handed with my luminosities, with my luminance, my saturation. I don't even barely add those. I let some of the processes add those through tone curves, et cetera. So the final couple things, and then we will jump in and look at images. I'll take some questions before we do that. Is to think about how light shapes our images. So this is another one of the charts. Feel free to email me. And we want to think about, even before we start processing this, how is the light interacting with our image? And how can we work with what we have there? And so I've broken light into 4 areas: angle, direction, color, and intensity. And so thinking about what we have, this is another one you'll reference, and how can we accentuate those lights? Okay, seeing where it's coming from. Is this a high angle light or a low angle light? Are we seeing a backlit situation? Are we seeing some beautiful side light that's going to bring out more contrasts within our image? What kind of intensity are we dealing with? If we're dealing with a really harsh scene, that might impact our processing more than if we're dealing with a really diffused or ethereal type of scene. So really thinking about how light shapes our images. Okay, quick couple plugs. I mentioned some of the workshops. One is this Saturday and next Saturday from 10 a.m. Mountain Time until 1 p.m. I'm teaching a 2-day, 2-weekend workshop, 3 hours each weekend, on things that go click in the night. And that's all about night photography. And so within the night photography, I'll talk about star, I'll talk a little bit about comet, eclipse, Milky Way, moon photography, as some of the things, plus a ton of other things. I'll go through all my planning, how I use photo pills, how I overcome some of the challenges related to my night photography. I'll talk pretty extensively about camera settings, Milky Way planning, gear selection, etc. This class is $75 for both weekends, so $37.50 a week weekend, and you get copy of the recording. It's actually limited to 15 people, and I still have about 5 spots left. There's not a lot of people that want to take night photography classes in the middle of winter. Who knew? I shouldn't have scheduled this one there, but that's there. And I'll actually drop this one in the chat real quick as well. And that's the first week. And then the second week, the second weekend is all about processing. And so we'll talk about in more detail than we're talking about tonight, some of the processing techniques. I'll show you like star stack, how I use that stack star images, talk about noise, and then we'll spend most of the 3 hours processing some of your night images. So people are like, well, I don't have night images. Well, great. You'll come and you'll see these techniques live in the classes we work through. So I hope some of my Colorado fellow and brothers and sisters can join. I'd love to see you get some diversity out. We got way too many California people in some of my workshops. And then my UK clients told me, I had a presentation yesterday. They said, we don't get clear enough skies over here for night photography. So I had to laugh. And then these are some of the other learning opportunities that are coming up. I'm teaching a whole bunch of classes between now and the summertime. Summertime, I'm hoping to be able to be escaped deep into the mountains for most of the time. And then I'm also going to drop the link in the chat for 2 free upcoming presentations that I'm doing for free in the next couple weeks. Number one is 911, what's your light room emergency? And the second one is psychology of photography. So those will both be somewhat interactive, not as interactive as what we'll have tonight, larger format, but they'll be really good informational things showing different things. And then final thing, we'll take questions, is I also have a bunch of cost-effective tutorials. They start at 15. The most expensive is 50, which is all about preparing your images for print. And it comes with the print credit that itself is worth $70. And so these are all on my website. Every single one of my tutorials and workshops comes with a 100% money back guarantee. If you take a class, you take a tutorial, you're not happy with the instruction, it doesn't fit for you, you don't find it applicable, I can either refund your money, no questions asked, or give you another one for free, whatever you want to do. But it's a good portion. So I wouldn't mind taking a couple questions. I'll stop my share before we share people's images. I know I just rattled through a lot of stuff in 25 minutes. So open for questions.
Yeah, I guess you just wowed them, Nick. Everybody's
I talk too fast to put them to sleep, but maybe they're watching CNN or something. There's something else going on I'm not aware of.
So I noticed that one of your workshops is on photo pills.
Yes.
Is that something you sign up then? Is that on your website? If I was interested in your photo
It's not announced. The official date isn't announced yet because I was waiting to hear on a trip to the Grand Canyon in May. I just found out today that it is going to be most likely a go. So now I can finalize my May schedule. But so it will be on my website shortly.
Okay. Okay. I'll keep an eye on that. And I apologize, I won't be able to join you on your 2-week workshop. I've already got my weekend is booked. So
I know that's the problem with you Colorado people. You're too active. Even with COVID, geez, we're always busy people. So.
well, actually it's a PPA.
Oh, good.
Yeah. You're familiar with PPA. This weekend is imaging. And then on to next week. It kicks off this weekend.
Nice.
So yeah, I'm going to be busy for a while. Which, by the way, anybody else who's listening, if you are a member of Professional Photographers of America, their annual conference is starting this weekend, and it's got an amazing amount of information. If anyone's interested, give me a holler. Or sign up for Nick's workshop, because that looks really cool too.
Yeah, either one's fine. So, all right, we'll give it like a minute as I'm sorry.
I have a question.
Yes, hi.
You said you were going to get all of your, we'd get all of the things for the workshop for this weekend and next weekend.
Yes.
And how would we receive that, and how do we learn about it?
Yeah, so I put the link into the chat, or it's on my website under workshops.
Okay.
And then it has one of the things it comes with is my Milky Way workflow. And so what the basic settings are I use on all of my images.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And then the recordings, then you get access to the recordings and you get to keep those. You get access to those indefinitely. So
awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. We'll see you. All right. Well, I will slowly start setting up Lightroom. Not setting up, but pulling it over. If there's any questions before I start that. Otherwise, I'll jump in here. And as I'm doing the presentations, I will, I will pull that up and then share the screen. 1 second. I got the images loaded. Great. I got somebody that messaged that said weekends don't work for them. And I want to say that the 2-day workshops are the only ones I do on the weekends. My other ones are usually on Wednesdays or Thursdays. I like my weekends a lot too, but the 2-day workshop works better there. So, all right. So now I'm going to share this. And as I'm going through it, if you have questions, go on ahead and ask. And then I'm also going to, oops. Just got a new webcam. I'm going to switch webcams real quick. Here we go. All right, should be there. Okay. Can we confirm we can see Lightroom?
It's there.
Wow. God, I'm just getting so good at the Zoom thing. So, and then I just jinxed myself. All right. So like I mentioned, we had 13 images. We can see we have a couple of RAWs. And then we have a couple of edited JPEGs. And so I'm going to make these a little larger. And there's different levels of people. I have some people that say, use Lightroom. I don't like Lightroom. I'm going to make this all the way as large as it can go. And then I'm going to minimize over here. To give us as much screen space to work with. They say, I don't like Lightroom. And I said, well, what do you use? And they say Adobe Camera Raw. I said, well, you're using the exact same program. So that's one differentiator. And so without going into all the detail of Lightroom versus Photoshop, like I said, I teach classes just on that. I can tell you straight across, I highly encourage people to use both. Lightroom to organize our photos specifically and to do a lot of the basic global edits and synchronization and some of the other stuff. And then Photoshop to really go in and fine tune particular aspects. And so I'm a big believer in both programs. But tonight we're pretty much just going to be focused on Lightroom and doing some of these locals, et cetera. And so I can pick a pick an image to start with, or somebody wants to go first. My critiques, as I communicated earlier on, are very kind. I'm not a harsh critiquer, nor should we be. We're all, and I can't say this enough when I talk about this, we're all on different stages of our photographic journey. And for us to harshly criticize somebody's image is not giving them credit for where they are in the process. Because when I started out, none of my images looked as good as any of these images I see here. So I just want us to all keep that in mind. So I'm happy to jump in wherever, unless somebody is just like, go for mine. All right. Well, I'm going to start with this one. So this was our completed image here. And the reason it was submitted was we were dealing with a high level of dynamic range. And it was asked to be able to show some of the techniques to bring out some of the dynamic range. So one of the things I noticed right away with your guys' group and just looking at some of these images that have been processed through is there's a lot of cropping that goes into these images, which is a good thing. And so for me, I might, have a couple different techniques. If I already have one I've processed, you hit the N key to do a compare, N as in Nick, and I can see the two images side by side. And so sometimes I'll oftentimes use this when I come back in with my memory card completely full of hundreds of images if I'm shooting seascapes and trying to capture exact moments or exact things. And I'll put up a screen of a bunch of different ones. Maybe I got 9 that I can't really make heads or tails of. So you can compare a bunch of images and then rule them out. I also use the compare functionality oftentimes to be able to take a much closer look at what I'm dealing with in the image. So that's N. So I'd probably take a look and see what I liked before and after. And with that, I'm just going to go on ahead and dive in. I'm a big proponent of the shortcuts. And so I use G for library or grid view and D for develop pretty extensively. So when you hear me say D, I'm kind of jumping into those. This one is, I thought it was a RAW. So this one's actually a JPEG. So this isn't going to be a good one to show the technique for setting white balance. I can only really do that on RAW photos, which I think I have a couple of those. But I can show the technique, especially related to how I do things differently. So I always want to enable my profile corrections and chromatic aberration. I don't have the camera profile loaded here. It's oftentimes what happens. But the way I'm going to approach this image after I enable those two things is one, I would do a white balance adjustment quickly. And the way I do this is I take my vibrance and my saturation all the way to 100 and just nuke this thing. And I take a look at what feels too blue or too orange within the image. And like I said, this isn't quite as dramatic in a JPEG image as we're going to see in some of the others, but it does feel a little blue, a little more blue maybe than I want. So I possibly would ever so slightly kind of warm it up. Very, very small. You can see I'm only going up like 2 points there. I might look a little bit around. Let me zoom in to see if I'm dealing with any green or other color cast. It doesn't look like I am. So I'm going to kind of pull that down. So a very small adjustment there. And next thing I'm going to do is use my tone curve to open up my highlights and my shadows. And what's happening here when I do the tone curve, which you watch, is it's really going to be impacting my midtones right in the center of my histogram much, much more than what I'm going to be dealing with if I was doing just my lights. So here's my midtones, just bringing down my lights. And so we got that dynamic range. And what we're doing is trying to pull down a little bit of that brightness up here. So watching the midtone when it goes there versus, if I did my highlights, it's pulling the whole histogram down much, much stronger towards the end. So this actually would benefit from a little bit of a highlights adjustment because it is kind of bright to get it off of any clipping. But I'll also take the lights down a little bit as well. And then I'm going to look at my darks and kind of opening up my darks. And you can see if you watch my midtone, I'm taking it away from some of the black portions of the image and really starting to open up and bring out some of the detail within the shadows. I'm not pushing over. So if I take my blacks up this way, up top, I'm not getting as much of I'm getting more of an adjustment of the dark tones. And I want to keep some of the darkness there. So that's why I do that. And then I'll open up the shadows. And if you watch my midtones here, I'm coming off the edge, but I'm keeping a lot of what's intact there. Versus if I'm opening up my global shadows here, it's really boosting the whole image. It's opening up my shadows all the way across. So I'm going to go back and re-zero this out. So look at my shadows now on my histogram. It's taking everything up all the way across in the image, versus when I open up my shadows here, I'm taking on the darker tones and the mid-tones much more and less subtly all the way down through. So I like this adjustment as well. And then possibly I'll look at the highlights a little bit, bringing down some of that brightness. I'll probably come back up here and adjust back. I'm watching my histogram all the way through. I'll hit the J key. J is in Julie, to turn on the darks or the brights. So if I had my image brighter, I would start to see, well, it's a JPEG. I'm not seeing where I am, but this is where I'm dark. I'm showing pure blacks. I'm okay with that. If I wasn't, I could open up my blacks ever so slightly. Maybe open up my whites as well. So one of the other things I see in this image is we see somebody that's out enjoying life and photographing, and that is sensor spots. It's not a thing to be shamed over by any stretch, but we get these sensor spots, which indicate we're out actually using our cameras and getting things in there. So the way I clean up my sensor spots, you come up here and hit the little spot removal, which is the Q key, and then you can come down here to your visualize spots, and it'll help you a little bit. So this is one of the cleanups I always do in Lightroom versus Photoshop. So it won't be perfect, but I can pick up a couple of them there, and I think I saw one right there too, and one over there. And so oftentimes clean those up. Horizon looks pretty straight, which is better than I do most of the time. There's a couple ways to set it. One is you can just do the drag across, which will ever so slightly pull it out. Looks a little better now. I like the little one that's there. So from here, we can start to make some other adjustments as we go through. We could maybe take our saturation up a little bit for the scene as a whole and see what it does. Not really liking that. I don't like doing global saturation and vibrance. I'll do it sometimes. We can add, I'm going to show on some of the other images, some of the techniques related to dehaze and texture and clarity. But I'm going to leave those alone. But what I do like on saturation is the localize adjustment. And so if you come down here under the HSL tab and you come over here to the left side, there's a little targeted adjustment tool. And if you click it, it goes on. And what you can do is come in and target specific tones. And so I want these kind of more greens and the yellows to come up. I want to pull up the saturation that I'm going to be seeing in that seaweed and part of that tree. And so I'm pulling up just that portion of the scene. And so really adding a fair amount of green saturations without oversaturating the image. So I'll do that oftentimes. Sharpening within the image, depending on what we're going to do, we're going to apply some amount. I have different techniques based on whether I think I'm going to print or not print, but I always have my radius either all the way down to 0.5. So the smallest radius amounts are going to sharpen the finer parts of our image. And then I will take my detail either all the way up, which is making it look crispy, or all the way down. And so maybe my sharpening. So now I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key and mask this image up. And what I'm going for is, where do I want to see these transitions? So white, this is 100% of the image is getting sharpened universally. This is almost none of the image is getting sharpened. And so I'm looking for that point in time where I'm seeing these transition points, these edges, or these that are much better that I can kind of sharpen. So maybe somewhere around there. So I'm sharpening a lot of these transition areas as they move through the image as well. Kind of a couple other modifications I might make as I go through. I love vignetting, not this kind of vignetting, this kind of vignetting, or more subtle vignetting. Maybe I'll adjust the midpoint ever so slightly, taking it down, but really pulling the eye in to the image much more. So I do a subtle vignetting. And then one of the techniques that's better on a raw, which I show, is oftentimes boosting my blue primary and my RGB. So this is directly out of the camera sensor. The camera sensors see in red, green, and blue, which are the three primaries. And the blue saturation channel, oftentimes in landscape scenes, can really benefit from a sharp burst as well. So I'd be looking at that. There's some other, minor things we could do. Let's look at a before and after. And so if we hit the key above the enter key, which is our a little backslash key, you can click and toggle between before and afters. Oh, whoops. When I cleaned out those dust spots, it was one of those was your bird. Sorry about that. Maybe I'll take that one away. So, but yeah, so anyways, and then you can see some of the other dust spots as we go through, but so there's your before and after as well. So comments from the actual photographer on this. I've neglected in this image to talk about what they wanted to bring out or what they wanted to pull forward. I just jumped in. I was too excited. I'm sorry. So comments, questions, things that, one more thing actually, before you comment. I would crop in and crop out. See on the right side, we have what's considered a border patrol issue where we have something that's just lightly sticking in on the right side and not a complete object. And so if you needed to keep that in there in terms of composition, you could then take it into Photoshop and really easily clean that out. I probably would just crop in ever so slightly so we don't have any distracting elements. Similar thing down here, I would probably clean that up and possibly clean that up in Photoshop. Lightroom will do a pretty crappy job, in my opinion, to do it, but at least you can clean it up. And we're just trying to find as least of distracting elements within the image. So I do the same thing here probably too. Okay, now you can go ahead, Kathy.
Oh, I didn't really have anything to say. It's, I brought out more red, but that was localized adjustments and color grading and going over into Photoshop, a combination.
Yep. So you can see a lot more of that in Photoshop. You can see if you're comparing the two images for sure in terms of what's there. So yeah,
But
I think you were working with a RAW when you took it into Photoshop, or were you working with a JPEG?
I apologize for not sending you a RAW. I didn't think of it.
You handicapped me. Geez, Kathy. No, it's good for me.
did.
Thank you.
I did. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I won't do it again.
No,
but
it's
my question was, what is the best way in the corner there, the left-hand corner? You can't see my cursor, but in the left-hand corner, those things. I mean, I know you can't do it in Lightroom. You take it over into Photoshop. I play around with cloning and,
yeah.
It doesn't work that well.
All right, well, let's do it really quickly. Because you asked the question and the way I would fix it. And this is the part of Photoshop that's absolutely, so I'm super excited. I upgraded from 16 gigabytes of RAM to 32, paid less than $100 to do it. If you want the link on how to do it, if you have a Mac, I'll send it to you. It's like priceless to be able to do it. So I would actually fix this. So down here on the left, I would do just the simple lasso tool. And I would come down here and just crudely draw around it, basically. You can even just draw down around here. And then I would go up to, oops, I didn't do it correctly. Sorry, I'm going to deselect and do it again. Forget with the lasso, you got to go all the way down around the bottom. And so I would highlight just that portion of it. And then I would go up to edit content aware fill. And this is dramatically increased with Photoshop. This is probably one of the biggest things. And it's selected those pixels that are as close to that as a match all the way around. And it's not perfect all the time. You can sometimes see maybe it got a little bit more there, but it's the best tool I've found to get rid of those types of things. Better than the clone brush and better than the spot healing brush. So that's how I would have done it.
Okie doke. Thank you for that. And then the other question I had is I've been playing a lot with color grading over in Lightroom. And I noticed you didn't do any of that. And I didn't know if that's because you wanted to emphasize the other things.
Yeah, I didn't do color grading, and it's in here because there's two reasons. One, I don't do my color grading in Photoshop. I mean, in Lightroom, I do it in Photoshop. The tools are much better for me. And then two, I just, I can't do, in the time period we have tonight, I can't do everybody's images from start to finish. So I'm trying to show different techniques and different images. So.
Got it. It's just the new toy in Lightroom.
Yeah,
so-
and the other part of it, if I'm being honest, because we're Colorado people here, I haven't played around enough with the color grading tool to speak honestly, to speak confidently about it. I'm sure I could figure it out pretty quickly, but I haven't figured it out yet. I haven't spent the time yet.
Now that's fair enough. Not too many people are talking about it, and that's why I asked.
Yeah. So.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Well, who wants to jump on in? Go next. Anyone? Bueller? We can just go in reverse order. All right, so we got old one antler buck from Brian. Brian, are you on?
I am.
Anything you want to say about these images here? Or?
The biggest problem I was trying to correct was the bright areas of the background I thought were distracting.
Yep.
And then also to get rid of that fence that was there. And then after I manipulated it, I went back and I was like, I'm not sure I like it the way I changed it. So just want to get your opinion.
Yeah. So it was funny the way this image showed through in the thumbnail I saw on Dropbox. It looked like you had cropped out part of his antler, and I was like, oh no. And then when I downloaded the JPEG, I'm like, oh phew. So one of the rules that's a huge portion of what I talk about with composition is the rule of space in particular. And that's being able to give the eye space to navigate around and space for the animal to move. And the images you oftentimes see that can be the most troublesome are the ones that are too cropped in and the eye, it feels very congested and other things, and you have that tension that you don't want. So you think you did an excellent job on cropping and on how you brought things out and left enough space within the image. Maybe on the right side, you could have left just a little bit more, but I don't think you're going to nitpick on that all the way through. I like the processing. So a couple techniques that I'm going to show that you could use, and you did a good job blurring the background already, but I'm going to show a couple techniques for people that don't know how to do it that I use in Lightroom. So I'm going to go into the develop module. We got old one antler here. Oh, I guess we have the raw. I have the raw I could work with, but I'm going to work on your JPEG though, just because it's a nice processing. So the radial filters are super powerful. And so the way I would use a radial on him is going to be a couple techniques. So I'm going to do one radial. I like that I know it's a he, because oftentimes I'll have an animal or something and I'm not sure if it's a he or a she, and I'll refer to him as a he and then as a she, and I get everything confused. And now I can confidently refer to him as a he. So then I would I have one of my preset brushes. So I built up different preset brushes that I use or adjustments. And I do one called blur background. And so what that has done is now blurred that background even more. And so this is the before and the after. And so we've blurred down pretty aggressively. You can see by taking our sharpness and our clarity down all the way, but now we've put even more of an emphasis and a focus on him. The downside is in this particular image is we have that up there out of focus. So there's a couple ways we can bring the antler back. One, we could just do a brush and then double click effect to zero it out and do the reverse. So we take our clarity and our sharpness up to 100 and then rebrush just really quickly over the antler to bring back any of that blurring as well. So that's one of the techniques I use oftentimes to blur back the background even more. So you had a great depth of field. I love your histogram here, and what we're dealing with. A lot of the data is in the mid-tones, which is where great images like to live. And what we're dealing with in terms of relatively low ISO, you're not going to see a lot of noise there. I like what I'm seeing from a technical capture perspective. Sharpening, I like the sharpening I'm seeing. We can do a couple techniques that I would consider. I'm not a super experienced wildlife photographer, so I know there's probably a lot of people out there that do a way better job on this, but I'm going to show a couple. So one of the ones I do I'll go into my masks and I will go to enhances details. And this one you can see is doing a bunch of different things. It's kind of bringing up exposure, the shadows, the textures, the clarity, and the dehaze, and a little bit of sharpness. And I'll oftentimes do this one just on the areas of these texture transitions. And so trying to pull out a little bit more, not on the down part, but around the face, maybe even on the forehead area as well, and whatever, to pull out more of the texture and the detail. And so that's one of the things I do use is to bring out more of that detail. We were talking about going towards textures and brightness and luminosity. That's one of the techniques that I would use. Another technique to consider on this image, which is similar to what I showed earlier. Now we got to look and see, did I blow? Yep. See, when I brushed over here, I blew out that portion. And so I would want to go back in, erase, and pull that part back in, and pull this part back in too, just to kind of keep it all balanced and in line. And then another technique, which I do somewhat of, is what I call a vignette within a vignette. And I'll do another vignette around him and pull it out. And I don't want the same effect as before. And I'm going to, maybe I forget what I'm doing here, so I can click the show mask overlay, and this is going to be outside of him. And I will pull the exposure down. I'll turn this off now. I'll pull the exposure down and darken, and I will oftentimes cool it just a little bit. So very subtle, not even a half a point on there. And then, oops, I didn't want to take that away. And then I'll come back in. I'll find that brush. Or that radial, I will duplicate it. And then I will invert it. So when I invert something, it now becomes back on himself, and I'll double check my mask if I need to. So now it's masking in there, and I will do the opposite. And I'll take my exposure up a little bit. Might take my highlights down so I don't lose any of that. And I will slightly warm the image as well. And so what I'm trying to do is get a very, very subtle interplay, or that separation between foreground and background, and create some of that difference and that tension, almost to that separation that brings out some dimensionality within the image. And so this is our before and our after. And so kind of subtly pulling the eye more into looking him in the eye, looking more on the face, blurring that background a little more, darkening what's in there as well. So that's that one. And then this would be our before and after as well. So those are some of the techniques that you can apply regardless of what it is, whether it's portrait work, regular landscape work, et cetera, that can go to work there. Comments, questions?
Thank you for that. That was interesting.
Yeah.
Never seen that vignette in a vignette. That works really well.
It's a Nick Stover original, so feel free to use it without giving me credit. I don't think there's a lot of money in vignette within a vignette royalties for me. So, well, good. I appreciate it. Makes me miss the mule deer of Colorado. We don't get many deer out here. So, okay. Well, I don't know how long we're supposed to go tonight. Do we have a general sentiment? I was going to probably go to like 8:30. Is that good? So keep rolling.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, I haven't seen anybody's head hit this. They have their cameras off, so if they've fallen asleep, they. So this is an interesting image.
We still have 23 out of 24 initial watchers.
Geez, that's better than I could do with my own family. So guess that's good. So Valley of the Gods, I think. I've never photographed there. I'd like to. So this image represents a couple things that are of note. One is, if we look over here, we have some haloing and some chromatic aberration going on because of the glow and the dynamicism that's really going on within the scene, which is a challenge. The other challenge we have is the is the contrast between the darkness that's in the dark and the lightness we're seeing of the sun hitting in there. So it's these kind of images are good challenges to go. So I would approach this differently. So let's say I took this image and I got home and 6 months later, I'm like, God, what was I even dealing with that day or whatever else? I might actually, and this I do quite a bit, I'd apply one of my presets to take a look at, to get a sense of what I'm dealing with. So my initial import one, I'm going to apply some basic presets that are going to put a lot of global and other adjustments in there. And I'm going to get a sense of what the image is capable of. What am I dealing with even within the image? So we still have some of that haloing down here. We can maybe in Photoshop remove some of that chromatic aberration. Might just be something we have to work with or whatever. So I would possibly apply one of my presets to get a sense of what I was dealing with. And then I could reset it back. Or maybe I wanted to create a virtual copy and get a sense of, so I only use presets to get a sense of what I'm dealing with within the image. I don't use them to process all the way through. So just something to keep in mind. They're more kind of a little more heavy handed than I want to deal with. So that's that one and this one. So I'm going to do a quick workflow, kind of talking out loud about how I would approach this image to get ready. So removing profile. All right, Nikon shooter. I like it. Removing chromatic aberration, enabling the profile corrections helps quite a bit down here. You can see removing chromatic and the profiles is getting rid of some of that flaring we've seen down there already. I would also set this one, since it's a raw image, I'll take my vibrance and my saturation all the way up and look at my white balance. My profile of choice is Adobe Standard. I find it seems to do better with the colors. I'm feeling a little bit, this is an interesting one. We got a lot of reds up here, which you'd expect, and then some kind of green color casting out in the back. So I might want to deal with my white balance almost separately. And so maybe back here, I would do a rate. I don't want to do a grad. I'm going to do a radial. So I do a radial back here, maybe to kind of take out some of that green cast that we're seeing back there. So I'd add a little bit of, maybe add some magenta back there, possibly cool it a little bit because I want that to recede back further than what I'm dealing with up here. And then look at my white. So rather than focus on two areas within the image, I've separated out a little bit of my white balance within that. This part up here, as shot, actually looks pretty good. I wouldn't change it from that standpoint of white balance, but kind of going back and forth. So just showing that, not a massive, oops, now I'm getting the spinning wheel. I brag about my memory thing and my computer working great. Now I'm getting the spinning wheel of death. Come on. Maybe I've been working it too hard today. It's trying to say it's time to call it a day, Nick. Oh, so anyway, so there's our before and come on. I'll keep talking through as it's catching back up again. It's not liking this image. Sorry about this. All right. 4. I think I got it back now. Maybe not. All right. So now I'm going to go back to it. It's not my internet, not that much. Okay. So now I'm going to go back to, and I've enabled profile corrections. So we're off the races. I've cooled this down, taken some of the, added a little magenta back there. Oh, one of the other techniques that could actually happen for this image too. It's not quite as applicable, except if you had more fog or whatever. One of the other things I love to do is add haze. So the tendency is to dehaze, but I oftentimes like adding some haze to create a little more atmospheric depth within the image. And so I'm adding a little bit of haze back there. Oh, I know what's going on here too. Actually, I don't think I have this one inverted. So now I'm gonna invert that. There we go. So, Okay, so now I've added a little haze to create a little bit of that depth back there. It also takes some of the focus off of this potential area here. I might come down to an image here and take my blue saturation up to 100% right out of the gates, because this will help kind of balance out the reds more. So you can see there's the before and there's the after. It brings out a nice color within the reds. And then I jump back up and I probably would do my lights and my darks. And so I'm watching up here, we're getting ready to clip pretty quickly. So I got to watch that as I'm opening up my lights, bringing up my darks, my shadows, taking down my highlights a little bit to preserve what's there. And then playing around a little bit also with these particular portions, bringing those up a little more. And then I would look at our saturation. Definitely taking up, oh, that's interesting. It's taking up, oh, I clicked in the wrong spot. That's interesting. So you click in the shadows, it's jacking up our magenta. Click on the brighter parts, which I meant to be, and we should be taking up our reds and our oranges. And so we definitely want to pull in some of that glow over here. And I'm going to show another technique. There's a couple more things we can do when we're thinking about focus, similar to the vignette within a vignette, but I'm going to vignette this image a little bit differently. So I do hand created vignettes oftentimes, and I'll use the grad filters to do these. And so I might vignette up here. I might take down the exposure, take down the highlights a little bit. I don't want to make it go gray or anything, but I'm trying to darken this so the eye doesn't go up there quite as much as well. One other technique that I'm going to sharpen this one. And I'm going to look at amount probably around there. I'm going to mask it. And so this one has great, really good texture on the sharpening. You can see the granularity. I don't know if you guys can probably see that on the zoom. Really good granularity, especially on the trees and what's going into there. So we're really be able to finely sharpen these areas. And that's a good thing. So we're sharpened there. I'll vignette down as well. Kind of keep that focus in there. And then I'm going to start taking a look at some of the other techniques. And so you can see I do have a workflow I use, but I oftentimes will bounce around quite a bit, back and forth, making an adjustment, coming back up, maybe pulling some stuff back into it, saying, okay, maybe I want to look more at my shadows, for example, what I want to take a look at. So the next one I want to show, and this is way better in Photoshop than what I'm going to show you in Lightroom. Another one of my presets that I use is add a light source. And so this one's adding some warmth, some exposure, some contrast, a little bit of clarity. And I'll oftentimes use this as a radial, and I will invert it, coming into a scene to create a little bit of that bleeding of the light coming in. And you can do this much better in Photoshop than we're going to get it in here. And that's a little bit too bright, but I could make it a little more warm. And I could also add a little bit of saturation to that. So we can do this to kind of bleed in a little bit of light into the scene. And what I'm looking to do is accentuate the light that's there. I'm not looking to build new light or anything else within the scene. So I can do that by also doing a range mask. And so range masking is a really powerful tool within Lightroom. And what you're telling a range mask to do is either to exclude the highlights or the darks or the shadows within any mask you put in. So whether it's a radial filter or a grad filter, you're telling it what to exclude. And so this one, I'm doing this one. I'm telling it to, if I go this way, I'm refining down the mask. So I'm making it look a little less of a bleed. If I go this way, you can go from both directions. It's not impacting the bright quite as much. And so now I'm kind of fine tuning this one all the way in, and I'm getting it to where it's got a nice bleed into that area there. And then I probably would take this mask and I would duplicate it again and shrink it down a little bit and move it up kind of up into this area as well. So we're range masking, and narrow it down, but we're range masking those areas. And so we're looking at not brightening up the highlights. I'm not brightening up the shadows, just trying to brighten up those highlights ever so much. And we double check on that. Yep, it's doing exactly where I want it to be. And so, yeah, so these are just some of the tweaks and how I'd go about kind of bringing out within the image. So this would be our, I'm having problems with my before and after, but. Sorry for my computer acting weird. There's our before and our after. Come on. All right, here we go. Before and after. And we'll look at the two side by side. And so whether that's 100% of what we want to deal with, I'm not sure, but I'm wanting to show different techniques. And this is I'm not the be all end all guru of processing in terms of I will process your image exactly the way you want it, as much as I'm here tonight to show you techniques that you can use in your images. And so maybe you don't like the haze, maybe you like the clarity more on this side. Well, don't do this technique, but maybe you have an image you want it. Maybe you don't like the way I kind of bled the light in here up here. Well, you can do it, save that technique for another image. And so that's part of the rationale of what I'm trying to show. Okay, I think we got time for one more and then some questions. Anyone in particular we should jump into or people want to put forward?
Go ahead and do mine. If you would.
Okay. Okay, so we got yours from Grays and Tories. Great, right?
Right.
Perfect. All right, so we got these two here. I'm going to hit the N key again for compare. So we're looking at these before and afters. I like some of the color separation we're dealing with in this in Tom's processed image as it works its way through. Looks like, did you clone out the road here as well?
Yeah, I did. That's actually the top of chair 9 on at Loveland.
Okay. Yeah. So we can see that we don't have that line kind of leading us out of the image quite as much. We got good separation within. We're bringing out some of the rock detail, which I like. And then we have some of the sharp. It looks like you did some sharpening or some dodging and burning back here. So we're going to look at a couple things. But yeah, so let's go into this one. I'm going to go into develop. Like I said, I didn't photograph this one. I'm going to apply one of my imports, get a sense of what I'm dealing with. I might actually work off of this one. So I'm going to go into an as shot white balance to get a sense of what I'm working with. I'm not going to mess around with what you did down here. I like that change though. I think it's a good to remove the kind of that man-made component in that. I talk a lot about how you don't want lines that are directing things out of the particular image. We don't have a ton of light to build off of in this image. There's not like, we're not dealing with spotlighting. We're not dealing with other things. And so I don't know what we could apply from that perspective. I am going to selectively look at our masking for our sharpening a little bit and what we want to have. We don't need to be sharpening the clouds, but these ridge lines are going to be good. We're going to vignette it a little more aggressively. We're going to boost our blues, which I really like the look what the blues did. So the blues, you can see the before and after. It actually brought out more of the goldens we wanted to see here and more of the blue here, which is what I want. I want these color separations within the image. I want to see to give it some depth as it kind of works through. So within the theme of depth and how we might want to work a scene like this as well, It sounds counterintuitive, but I'm going to do a radial here. I'm going to invert it, and then I'm going to double check where we're dealing with. Okay, so now I'm going to take it, I'm going to make it a little larger, and I'm going to use that technique I showed earlier, and I'm going to possibly add a little bit of haze. Not a lot, a little bit. I'm going to take down the sharpness a little bit to make it a little less sharp. I'm going to take down a little bit of clarity as well. I'm going to add a little more black. And I'll take a look at what that looks like. Yeah, so that's what I'm going for. So trying to get a little more separation from the back, from Grays and Torreys in the distance from this mountain range here. And then I would probably do some different, what I call color, and I'm sure there's a better term for it, but I call it color dodging and burning. And so I will go in to warm my seam up, which is going to add some warmth, take down my highlights a little bit, add some shadows. You can see adding some contrast and almost desaturating. And I'm going to warm up this portion here. I'm going to brush this, kind of warm it up and bring out a little bit more within there to get separation. And then I'm going to go into and do a new brush, and the new one will be cool my scene down. And so these are how what I talked about earlier in the processing portion is, you know, the different types of transitions, dark to bright, smooth to textured. We're going to be dealing with warms to cools. So an image like this, we're going to now, this area here, we want this to recede more into the image. And so we're creating a little bit of separation there within the image to kind of bring that out. And then the final, I'd probably do another brush. And I would go through and I would enhance the details. So now I'm going to brush this portion. And what I'm trying to do here is make this area closer to me. So I'm adding texture, clarity, which is a lot of mid-tone to the image. And I'm making this area closer to us feel like it's much sharper, feel like it's more textured within the image as well. And so now we've pulled that in, and you can feel that detail and kind of that depth. And so this would be our before and our after, but it's not really inapplicable. So now we need to compare these two to each other. Oops. Is that the one we had? Yeah, those are the two, sorry. Why is it not? Oh, I'm not doing before and after. Sorry, 1 second. For some reason it's doing, can't get it to work tonight. There's our two images. So there's the JPEG you put out, Tom, and then there's the one on the right that I processed with that, trying to put a little bit more of the, like I said, the warms and the cools, putting a little more distance in place, having the fade. The other consideration I would see now as I look at these two kind of side by side, I like what this is showing right here personally. You can make some tweaks and modifications. What's also come out in terms of some of the minor tweaks I've made is I'm seeing a little more of that cloud detail, which I might want to now go through, and I don't want to add it like that. That makes it look like a cheap HDR, but I'll double click my effect and I'm going to darken it possibly a little bit. Open up the shadows, bring down the blacks, and kind of bring out, maybe add some more, a little bit of clarity, a little bit of texture in there, bring out more of that drama in the clouds. I'm gonna have to look at that closer. So that'd be the before and after of those two, or that was the one the JPEG, and this is the other one here.
Very nice job, Nick. Thank you.
Well, I just didn't get I want the image, so I got to go take it myself. So All right. Well, I'm going to stop the share and give some time towards the tail end. I do need to drop in about 10 minutes. But got some time for some questions, or what did you do about this or do about that, or how does something work or whatever. So
I would like to make a comment. You know, a lot of us started shooting even before digital photography existed.
I've heard of you.
Yeah, and we
Yeah.
have all these collections of 35mm slides. And what I have found that you can actually manipulate these things in Lightroom. You have to scan them in at, you know, at least a 5MB JPEG file. And, you know, the biggest problems are dust. Obviously, even if you clean them, there's dust in the emulsion and there's noise, but you can correct for some of the luminosity noise that you get in there. You can't sharpen as much, but a lot of these tools you can actually use to some degree. You know, I would not attempt to manipulate any of the 4 photos that we saw in the befores. You know, I would think they would have to be a little bit better quality than that in a 35mm slide to actually use these tools. But you can actually do quite a bit with them and get some decent photos. I mean, most of the time you shot a roll of 36 and you only saved 2 or 3 anyway. So they were the best images that you had.
Yep.
Don't
No, I've heard
away your slides.
well, I've heard from a lot of people that I didn't ever shoot slide film. I've never shot professionally with film, but I've heard from a lot of people that say the dynamic range that you're able to pull out of some of the older slide film is just as good as the modern camera sensors, but which is interesting.
I have a question. You mentioned adjusting the blue channel. It's also possible to adjust blue saturation on HSL. So what's the difference in those 2 effects?
Yeah, so the blue channel is adjusting the actual. So basically, if I understand it correctly, and I'm still trying to make sure I can articulate this correctly every time, your camera's capturing an RGB. So it's capturing some variation. Each pixel is some variation of red, green, or blue in terms of it captures. And when you're boosting your blue channel, it's actually boosting those blue pixels as captured by your camera versus the saturation. And so saturation will be the richness of those pixels, but the blue is boosting. When you're adjusting the calibration, you're adjusting the blue of the RGB capture. And so I've done it on a lot of images where I've had to boost my blues up, which really help my shadows. And then I have to desaturate my sky, which is interesting. So it boosts my sky up, but it doesn't desaturate my shadows quite as much. So that's kind of that's my understanding of what the RGB does on the calibration. It's the actual camera channel, but I'm still looking for better explanations in my work to be able to show like, aha, this is exactly what it's doing. And I found some, but it doesn't saturate. I don't see anywhere near the saturation as I see just the boosting of the pixels.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, it's 8:30. If there are no more questions, I think we can let Nick go. That was great, Nick.
Well, thank you,
I
Ellen.
couldn't-
Glad to be here.
I'd like
A lot of
to also
information.
thank you very much. That was a fantastic job. All kinds of little techniques you showed us that all went by very, very quickly. I'll try to get this video posted so people can poke around and figure out what you were doing in a lot of those spots.
Yeah, or come join one of my hands-on classes. They're $35 and they're 2.5 to 3 hours long, and we're playing with your images directly and going into more detail. So love to have you. So
Hey, would you take students who only have older versions of Lightroom with no dehaze?
oh, absolutely. I have clients that use Luminar that come take my classes, and they ask me questions all the time, and I'm like, I don't know what Luminar does, but I can show you what I do in Lightroom, and maybe you can apply it there. So yeah, absolutely.
So you're equating Lightroom 6 with Luminar.
No, no. Yeah, exactly. Well, it's like
It
when Alan
should.
read my thing. I welcome photographers of all backgrounds and skills, and I could put the fine print regardless of the Adobe subscription that they hold. So
All right. Well, I know we really appreciated your time tonight, and thank you very much for an excellent presentation.
oh yeah, very glad, and I'm glad to spend some time with you guys, and hopefully I'll see you for future classes.